Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us today at the Growing Summit to talk about IPM and cannabis. My name's ANDREA KEDDY. I'm joining you from Calgary, Alberta, and I work with KOPPERT Biologicals. We have a great group of folks here today on today's panel with a very diverse background in cannabis and pest management. When we gathered this panel together, we were discussing how there's so many aspects to integrated pest management and how that looks specifically in cannabis. We wanted to get into some really practical, in-the-field experiences to share with you above and beyond the pests and the beneficials used, and really dig into what works in cannabis crops, where there's so many different aspects that need to be considered, like the environmental, the quality control, all those other issues that come into play with an IPM program for this very unique crop. So without any delay, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. Av, starting with you, please tell us in 60 seconds or less who you are, where you're joining us from, and how you're involved in the cannabis industry.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm Av Singh. I'm an agronomist with Green Star Plant Products. We are the proud manufacturers of GrowTech and Gaia Green nutrients. And I'm coming to you today from Wolfville, Nova Scotia.
Awesome. Thanks, Av. ANOO, please introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, my name is and I'm the owner of CANNAPROTECT Solutions. I basically go to various cannabis facilities and I diagnose, I treat, I set up and curative plans, I revamp your SOPs. I also educate your staff. I teach part-time at Niagara College for the commercial cannabis production program, and I am residing in Ontario.
Great, thanks, ANOO. Next up, Laura.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Dole. Thanks for having me today. My story is a little bit similar to what ANOO does. I come from a background of large commercial vegetable greenhouses, and then I went to indoor cannabis with Tilray in Nanaimo, BC on the beautiful Vancouver Island, and worked with some great people there. And then I worked with an LP that was getting their license before I came to Sundial Growers in Alberta. Thank you.
Great, Laura, thanks. And Andrew, last but not least.
Hi, my name is Andrew Lachlan. I am where I reside in Nelson, British Columbia. I've been growing for about 23 years now. And, you know, I've had great people around me who help teach me a lot about growing. I've done outdoor, indoor, normal like salt growing, as well as organics, which is what I really am into right now. And yeah, just happy to be on this panel, and hopefully we can help out.
Great. So we have a really wide diversity of people, from growers to IPM to educators. So I would like to have Av start things off. And Av, will you tell us a bit about what you do with cannabis and how IPM, your approach to IPM in cannabis crops with what you do?
So to me, oftentimes, I think you said in your intro, when a lot of people think about IPM, they immediately jump to the idea of using beneficials or biopesticides, and perhaps even more synthetic pesticides. Where we come in, and I kind of leave that type of stuff to ANOO and yourself and to Laura, where we like to focus is really around the cultural control. And so when I think of IPM, to me, the foundation of IPM is cultural control. And for that is largely your cultivation techniques and your environment. So that's what I was kind of hoping to highlight in my presentation, was just to say that it's really your nutrients and your environment that can make or break the rest of your crop. So what I like to do is when I'm talking about nutrients, I want to really focus beyond the typical NPK. Oftentimes we'll see that we focus on the three primary nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. They are the nutrients that we tend to use the most, and the plant uses the most, but overemphasis on those and a lack of emphasis on so many other nutrients can lead to a lot of pest and pathogen issues. And so where I'd like to go is oftentimes when I think about cannabis, of course, we've got the vegetative phase and we've got the reproductive phase. In the vegetative phase, it's really important that there's certain nutrients that really drive that growth, and that is predominantly nitrate, nitrogen, potassium, a little bit of chlorine. So even a micronutrient like chlorine can really drive vegetative growth, and calcium. So what's interesting about those nutrients, and primarily when you think of nitrate, nitrogen, potassium and chlorine, they are what we would consider auxin-dominated nutrients. They kind of really promote auxin growth. And so auxin is a phytohormone that the plant produces. Typically, you see that phytohormone produced primarily at the growing points of the plant. And what's interesting is that we have many different phytohormones, but another dominant phytohormone is cytokinin. Cytokinin is actually produced predominantly in the root tips. And what's interesting to note is that calcium drives cytokinin production. And this gets really complicated is that when you look at auxins and cytokinins, they're almost antagonists. Auxins are typically the kind of what we would consider like a sugar magnet. When you are photosynthesizing, you're producing all this sugar. Wherever there is the most amount of auxin is where most of your sugars are going to go. And so in that vegetative growth, you have a lot of auxins in the top of your plants in your apical meristem. You're going to get a lot of auxin production there. There will be auxins in your roots, so you will be getting sugars to your roots and whatnot. But at the same time, auxins and cytokinins kind of fight each other. And when you really want to make sure that you're getting the proper internode length, that's where you kind of want to make sure that you are having enough cytokinin production to make sure that your auxin production isn't increasing your internode length. And so you're getting tighter internodes, more opportunity for bud sites and whatnot. And so that's why when we think about vegetative growth, we don't want to focus too much on nitrate nitrogen. Nitrate nitrogen is essential, but if you have too much of it, what happens is the plant takes up the nitrate nitrogen. It doesn't get to totally convert that nitrate nitrogen into an amino acid. And so you end up getting more elongated growth. You actually get a lot of nitrate into your plant sap. You get thinner cell walls. Thin cell walls, of course, make it easier for a germination tube of something like powdery mildew to penetrate through that cell wall and get into the plant. So we want to have tighter nutrients, tighter cell walls, so we can actually prevent pathogen invasion. And similarly, when you have a lot of nitrate nitrogen, you will throw off your nitrate to potassium ratio. When you do that, your plant sap, your Brix levels, if you're familiar with Brix, that kind of measures your total dissolved solids, that'll decrease. And when that decreases, it's another signal to insects to say that this is not a healthy plant. Let's come eat it. Then just to jump into when you want to flip that plant into flower, there are different nutrients that kind of take hold. And another thing we want to kind of highlight. Nitrogen is still important, but not in the nitrate form, ideally in the ammonium form. Potassium is still relatively important, but phosphorus becomes more important, and a trace mineral like manganese becomes important. And so what we want to do is make sure that when you're thinking about feeding the plant, you're not only focused on those NPK and making sure that your N is in the right form, but also that you have a lot of these trace minerals. And so we can do that in large part by making sure that you're adding trace minerals into your soil system. And a lot of times we'll see that a lot of growers will use biostimulants. They'll use things like fish hydrolysate or kelp or humates, along rock dust. A lot of these products will have a lot of trace minerals, and they also facilitate that uptake of those nutrients. I guess I maybe want to talk a little bit about environment as well. That's one of the key other component when you're thinking about cultural control, is that as a grower, and I'm sure Andrew will comment on this more, it's on this constant balance where you're trying to push the optimal growing conditions for the plant, but at the same time trying to minimize those growing conditions for your pathogens. For example, if you really want to get rid of powdery mildew, high temperatures do a great job of that, right? So you increase your temperatures over 75 Fahrenheit, and typically powdery mildew does not like that environment. You could try running a higher relative humidity. That will decrease powdery mildew buildup. But if you get powdery mildew and you have a high humidity, it'll spread even more. So you want to be watching your relative humidity as well. Low relative humidity is great to decrease botrytis, but you could also lower your relative humidity to the point that your vapor pressure deficit is affected and you're not getting as great nutrient uptake. So once again, that's the hard part of being a grower, is you've got to balance all of that as well. We can also look at temperatures, or I mentioned that with powdery mildew, but if you got your temperatures too high, for example, you start, popping in a little extra CO2, you increase your temperatures. If you don't actually have the right nutrients to make sure that your plants are able to feed themselves well, high temperatures will trigger the plant to stop doing photosynthesis and go into photorespiration mode. When a plant goes into photorespiration during lights on, it still needs the energy. If it's not getting the energy through taking up nutrients, it'll start breaking down its own proteins. And typically what happens, it'll break down some proteins and you will end up getting a lot of the ammonia left in your sap. When you have that ammonia left in your sap, that's a neon light for the thrips, spider mites. We often think spider mites like high temperatures. What they really like is ammonium. And that is what they're going to find in their tree sap, in your plant sap and stuff. So just to throw that out there, for me, cultural control is the foundation of IPM. We really want to focus on our nutrients and our environment.
That's great, Av. I think it's really important to touch on these cultural aspects as well, because any of us working in the cannabis industry, we have really limited tools in our toolbox to make corrections when problems do arise. So I really love the approach that you take of getting into there right at the get-go and looking at what the plant is doing with the nutrition that you've given it, the environment that you've given it. You can actually really close a lot of these holes in the IPM loop by going right to that cultural level. ANOO, with what your experiences are, tell us a bit about your experiences with cannabis and IPM as well.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I'm finding with the IPM aspect of cannabis is that the training and understanding, comprehension of the staff that are trying to deal with pathogenic infestations and pest infestations, it's not there. So I find that there's a big struggle when there is a large infestation and the team doesn't exactly know what they're looking for. So that's part of why I try to make sure that I educate as best as I can. So one of the things that I'm finding right now is that, and probably most people here, is the cannabis aphid is becoming a huge, huge, huge problem in many, many facilities. And one of the things that is a bit of a gray area isn't an effective treatment for them. We've seen various types of bios being used, various lady beetles like Adalia. We got parasitic wasps. We have the Matricariae, the Urbi, the Colomanes being used. I've seen Delosha, as in the rove beetle, being used. But nobody can really say that, yep, this is the one that's going to do the trick. It's sort of, everybody's in MacGyver mode when dealing with the cannabis aphid. So again, touching base with what Av is talking about, is there's multiple ways of handling problematic situations in your crops. So biological controls, that would be the releasing of your bios that a reputable person like yourself, Andrea, who works for KOPPERT, that is who they need to reach out to have the conversation of, hey, can you just kind of confirm that I do have a cannabis aphid problem or a different aphid problem? And then that's when they want to work with teams like yours that you put together your plan and what are you going to do to take care of it. So chemical treatments as well. If you get to the point where you are kind of in an emergency mode or you want to maintain a preventative mode because maybe you've already had this problem and you got it under control once, looking at different things like the insecticidal soaps, the horticultural oils are fantastic because a lot of people don't realize it's not just about being a suffocant for the powdery mildew. It's not just about killing the spider mites, but it actually prevents the aphids from feeding. It's a big deterrent in that aspect. So you actually have a horticultural oil that's going to act as a triple threat for things that are harming your crops. Then there's also the myco-insecticides like the Beauveria bassiana, which is basically it's a pathogenic living fungus that you apply to your plants, and then as the pests feed on it, they get impacted and hopefully their numbers start to drop off. Cultural practices play a huge role as well, where I've touched base on that. So in the cannabis industry, we're seeing that hygiene. I noticed that hygiene is kind of overlooked in the sense when somebody is working in an infested crop, they're not really doing everything they can to mitigate that. And again, I think part of that comes back to not being aware of how to IPM properly, to put it simply. So with those cultural practices, let's look at those resistant cultivars. Okay, fine. We understand there is a very specific demand by the consumer for different strains, but perhaps we could look at a hybrid version that might have had a resistant cultivar used in the breeding process. I've been in rooms where they have multiple lots side by side, and on lot A, there's a rampant infestation, and then on lot B, directly beside with no separation, there's nothing. So that is a very legitimate point that people need to start addressing, that if you want to avoid this, let's figure out how to add maybe a bit more resistance into what you're growing. Another big thing, the business to business, the supply chain, the third party supplier. Another reason that we're seeing the spread is because maybe the supplier has an infected room or two, and when the new facility is accepting that crop, they might not know what to look for. They might not be doing the full inspection. Maybe they're looking for PM or thrip or something that leaves an aesthetic damage that you can see easily. Whereas the aphid, it doesn't do that. It's actually feeding on the sap that's within the phloem. And so your plants might look a little stunted. They might look a little droopy. Maybe they're a little yellow, but that could be mistaken. Is it overwatering, underwatering? Is it nutrient excess, nutrient deficiency? Is it the hop latent viroid? You wouldn't know unless you've sent out for samples. So you need that inspection to get a little closer. You need to go into the crop and actually do the proper scouting and look for the insects. You'll also see with the cannabis aphid, there's going to be little exoskeletons laying all around on the leaves and maybe on your soil surface. And if you start to get into the stages where it's really, really detrimental, you might notice the little honeydew, which, how bizarre, has now become a delicacy in some countries. I'm good. I don't think I really need to eat. Oh yeah, it's a big thing. I'm not about to eat insect brass, so to each their own. No judgment here. But yeah, so this honeydew is actually basically like a sugary droplet left on the leaves, and what's happening is that creates an ideal breeding environment for the sooty mold fungus. So you'll start to see this black mold on your leaf surface, and it's sad. It looks gross. It looks terrible, but you can't miss it. So that's a telltale sign. And at that point, you've got a really big problem. So what we want to hope is that when you're getting to that stage, that maybe your bios have actually started working better, and we're going to see some parasitization on those leaves, most likely on the underside, maybe around the petiole. And that mummification is your parasitic wasp hard at work making a horror movie on your plants, where it's injecting a live offspring into a living aphid where that offspring is feeding, and then it's slowly mummifying the aphid, and as it mummifies it, it's drying out, and then like the scene out of Alien, it bursts through the aphid and goes on its merry way to do the same thing to the rest of the aphids on your crop. So that's the kind of thing we want to see in something that's a quite disturbing visual when it's at a point where it's out of control. I've seen sad crop losses, and the idea is, with the research we currently have being fairly outdated and definitely not compliant with Health Canada regulations, we need those studies being done, like with what I'm doing right now with the efficacy of the bios and the chemicals for the cannabis aphid. Again, coming back to the sterilization and hygiene, that's a big part of preventing that mitigation. You know, you always want to go from your clean area of your facility into your dirty, and then don't go back into the clean. Once you're dirty, you're dirty. Go get rid of your PPE properly, sanitize yourself, sanitize your snips, your gloves, your bag, your bucket, whatever you're using in the contaminated area. You need to make sure that it's sterilized, sanitized, and discarded properly. Otherwise, you're just going to be keeping it through, moving it through your facility. A staff I encountered, she went home and found cannabis aphids in her bra, which was just mortifying to me. So I make sure my Tyvek is zipped up to the top. And then I always suggest that people work in teams and inspect each other before you leave that area. Have a look. A big place I've noticed is like underneath the hairnet base, where the hairnet tucks under maybe a woman's bun. They're getting stuck up there too. So we are one of the worst vectors. There's no doubt about that. If you want to make a place dirty, throw a couple humans in that aren't paying attention, and that's all it's going to take for your crop to absolutely get ravaged. Other than that, that we've seen the common spider mite treatments and all those lovely things. They have a specialized predator that you always go to when you have that problem. What we want to see is, let's figure out what the specialized predator for the cannabis aphid is. And again, that comes back to the diagnosis in the past, where the hop aphid and the cannabis aphid are commonly mistaken for one another. And the only real way to properly identify is get your aphid under the microscope, have a look at the head area where the tubercles are, sort of near the antenna, and coming off those tubercles is going to be small kind of hair-like bristle projections that have a little bulb tip on the top of it. So the hop aphid will not have the bulb tip setae on it, whereas the cannabis aphid will. And from a visual color perspective, you can see them that they can be a bright, vibrant green. They're plump, they're happy. But then depending on the season changes, they can start to lose some of that green vibrancy and go to yellow. The other thing as well is that in an overly populated area, if there isn't enough plant material, the aphid is highly competitive. So you'll actually see starvation happening. And in that, you will see the decline in the color and the plumpness in your aphids, which is like, hooray, hooray, die aphids. So those things, that awareness of what to look for, and maybe that's helping you to understand that actually your treatments are working well, or maybe your treatments aren't working. If they're really, really thriving, you want to just figure out for what works in your facility. Maybe you're an organic facility, maybe you're a chemical-free facility, maybe you are okay with combining everything, and that's what you need to do, is figure out for how you want to grow and the products you want to put out, what's the treatment plan that you'd like to see.
That's so true, ANOO. Every facility is a little bit different in regards to their setup and the pest problems that they do encounter. So it's really important to have those identifications and knowing your actual grow. And I really like that you touched on the point that humans are one of these vectors when it comes to growing. And I think we all need to be humbled by that sometimes. We're all going to work and working the crop and giving all of our love to the crop, but we sometimes forget that we're carrying around some of these insects and pathogens that cause issues. Laura, you're working with Sundial as an integrated crop manager. I'm wondering, could you give us some insights from your perspective of how IPM works for you, and what are some of the tricks perhaps that you've done, or some of the observations that you've had over the years in regards to cannabis, and how those things really work effectively for you at Sundial?
Okay, so I think that integrated crop management might be a new term for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad that Av started out explaining what he did and what Anu said, because to me, ICM versus IPM, it brings the two together. So, like you said, Andrea, all we have is limited tools right now in the cannabis industry. In my opinion, with Health Canada, you know, it's a new industry. And I believe that we're going to go in the direction of the vegetables, where with time, we're going to gain those types of tools where we could give our plants a drink of something, walk away, and all the cannabis aphid drop dead on the floor, and we go, you know, have lunch. But we're not
Yeah.
there yet. The vegetable industry does have such tools. So, you know, sometimes I wonder, like, what makes it okay to feed these to, you know, all of our vegetables, but not our cannabis? And someone said, well, it's because we light the cannabis on fire. We don't do that to the vegetables. And I said, well, what are you doing when you're putting it on a barbecue? Okay. So, yeah, I think in my experience, you cannot underestimate the importance of preventative measures. And you want your IPM or ICM department to be quiet and bored and boring and uneventful, because that's a good thing. Because as from the sounds of a news experience, there are a lot of LPs that are having a really difficult time dealing with these pest insects. So, like Av said, first you can start with proper nutrition. Don't let your ammonium build up. That's going to invite spider mite. If your balances are out of balance and you do get things, or you know, someone brings something into the facility from their home grow, at least then you have the next level of tools to try to deal with it. Like Anu said, a variety of beneficial insects. None of them are really 100% for cannabis aphid, as she explained. The other thing, as she explained as well, is you can't underestimate sanitation practices. So actually, I took for granted, thinking that everyone already knew this, as it was pretty standard to me, but I'm learning that it's actually not. So one of the key things we can tell all the people out there to take away from is always consider your cleanliness, not only in the room, like leaving, you know, debris behind that would start, you know, botrytis spores and that kind of thing, but when you're snipping a plant, sanitize that snipping tool if you can before you go to the next plant. Because coming from the vegetable industry, I've seen plant viruses go through acres in a day, just because essentially what you're doing, if you were likening the plants to humans, is you're cutting yourself to bleed with a butter knife and then passing it around a room to a whole bunch of people to do the same thing with the same knife over and over again. Someone would call the cops on you. So why do that to the plants? So, you know, sanitation of tools in between plants is important. Your hands are often tools. So please, you know, consider sanitizing your hands if you're pruning using your gloves, gloved hands. And yeah, I can really only hope that we progress towards the vegetable industry where we get more tools in our toolbox.
Absolutely. I like that you actually point out that those similarities between the vegetable industry and passing things along, because there's a lot of things that we can learn from the vegetable industry that have become practice through experience. And cannabis has taught the vegetable industry. The vegetable industry can also teach cannabis a lot of things as well. So it's good to have these conversations. Andrew, you are in interior BC, and you've been going for a time. You have an internship at your grow. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences with? Tell us about your setup, and tell us about some of your experiences with how to manage pest problems with your very unique system.
Sure. Okay. So basically everything that was said here is it's exactly spot on. Our system is I've got an organic grow. I've been using the same soil for close to 4 years now. Haven't changed it at all. Now, I think Health Canada may challenge some of the things that I'm doing right now as I'm a legacy grower, but at the same time, I feel that that's the direction that it would go with working with organics. So I've got cloth beds made from recycled bottles with a living soil set up in there, and like what we were just discussing, being preemptive rather than being reactive is probably the most important aspect of this whole conversation. And in taking in all of those subcategories like nutrition. So whether you're a salt grower or an organic grower, for instance, what I do with my organic grow, 2 weeks before harvest, we take multiple samples and we send my soil into a lab. I send it to Logan Labs in the States because they do the Malic 3 and the paste test for me. If you're going to grow, it's always good to understand what you're putting in and what is actually in your soil, especially in organics. And so then I get my results back, and we discuss. We see what needs to go in. I get recommendations, and then I add to my soil. So I'm always keeping my soil at an optimal level. I have all the nutrients, not just the NPK, as I've stated. It's like I need my micros, I need everything else in there. Your boron, your copper sulfate, all that stuff needs to be part of the equation. And you come as close as you can to getting that perfect sort of system for your plants to grow up to be healthy. And when they're healthy, they can fight off a lot of pathogens and whatnot, etc. But of course, they will come. So scouting, the next thing that we touched upon, we do this every few days. We go through the garden and you scout and you look for potential issues. So that's a very important aspect. And of course, education. What are you looking for? Having someone with experience to be able to see, potential pathogens, getting them early. It's almost like cancer with humans. Getting it early really wins the game at the end of the day. So when it's a major infestation, we have a very limited amount of tools that we can utilize to beat this infestation down. You don't ever want to go there. So you have to be very proactive. VPD, or vapor pressure deficit, understanding your temperatures, like Av said as well. It's like, do you want to grow at 75 degrees, or I like to grow at 83 degrees. I use LED lights. My CO2 levels are around 1,400 parts per million, and everyone can discuss whether they want to go more or less. So understanding your watering, your cycles, how to put nutrients into your soil. So if you're a salt grower, you're always kind of measuring that perfect amount of solution, and it's always best to be in a driver's seat. So be on the low side of nitrogen. It's easier to add a little bit more nitrogen than have too much of something and just blindly amend. That's always been a difficult issue with me, especially in organic gardening, when people just are blindly amending between each grow and they're wondering why they're always getting PM or whatnot. And usually it's because their nitrogen levels are way too high, or they're just missing a few components, when all you need to do is test. So how to deal with pathogens. I've always got bugs. Andrea and Kevin from KOPPERT, they've been very helpful for me over the years. And I'm preemptively always ordering in bugs. I haven't had spider mites in 8 years, but I still order Persimilis a few times a year. I just keep them going in my garden. I've got, all sorts of different bugs that are there, even though I don't have anything. I preemptively order bugs, or predator mites and predator bugs, to stay on top of it. Growing organically is something that I've really focused on. I've done all styles. And a very important aspect with growing organically is again, like knowing your soil, and you're not feeding the plants anymore. You're actually feeding the soil. And, a very important aspect for me I can bring up is, like, say, my CO2 levels. We talked about that, Andrea, how my CO2 levels are, when I take down, I actually can sanitize a whole room and then transplant or put new plants into the room the same day, if not the next day. And what I found is because I've been utilizing the same soil, and I've been, my amendments, by the way, for a large, like a 40 light room is usually about $100. cost me a couple $100 in testing, but you know, it's that knowledge base that you need to know what to put into your soil. And I always found that I used to put in way too much. You know, we love our plants to death. You know, once heard that saying before. So yeah, so I find the CO2 levels are extreme. I have to actually evacuate CO2 because I have a live soil, and all my microbials, everything in there is emitting CO2. So I have to evacuate CO2. I'm at 5,000 plus parts a million a day during my daylight on. And so, you know, for me, it's like my plants, we put them in there, and then within a week, the plants are taking in the CO2, and that tells you when to flip the plants and to move it to its flower cycle, when they're actually able to take in the CO2 that's being emitted from the soil. And then, of course, then we start adding some CO2, and we want to keep that optimal level. Again, everything needs to be optimal. I mean, you need to have your predator mites in there. You need to have your knowledge of what you're putting in your plants, be it synthetic or organic, knowing what you're putting in, being able to scout, understand what it is that you're looking for, and catching it like in advance. You know, again, that proactive sort of mindset. And you know, the big one that I think we touched on this too, cultivars. So I mean, the most important aspect is genetics. That is very important. You know, you talk about having a cultivar that doesn't have PM right beside one that does. And then, you know, my goal and every grower's goal should be, how can you bring that genetic to its best, you know, to what it can actually be, you know what I mean? Like, you're trying to bring that genetic to be the best that it can be. And it's all about everything we just talked about, from the vapor pressure to the amount of light you're going to give it, to the soil and the food that you're giving it, to making sure it's not being attacked by either you know, PM or bugs or whatnot. And all of this is like a multi-dimensional thing. You know, we really need to understand our plants. We really need to understand the biology of our rooms. You can get one genetic, we can all grow that same genetic, and the terpene profile and the cannabinoid, the profiles will all be completely different. It's funny, but you know, we've done this test. I've had the same genetic in like 5 different rooms, and they've all come out like they're nice, but they're very different. Some of them you wouldn't even recognize, you know, color, everything else. So, you know, it's very interesting how we can control the cultivar through all of these aspects, be it your growing medium, your lights, your VPD. You know, if it hasn't had any disease, if it has had disease, you know, some plants really do really well and they get like some type of pathogen at the end because they're stressed. But at the end of the day, you know thy vector, you know. And another thing I think people really miss out on is really making sure you have a very, very efficient, clean bomber, mom, and clone room, because it all starts there. It all starts there. So, you know, obviously you don't want to take clones from outside of your facility. That's a big no-no. And if you're doing it, I would suggest having a dedicated room. 2 is, you know, that's the future of your grow. And I find a lot of times I go and see a lot of beautiful flower rooms, and then I look at the mom and cloning room, and it's kind of substandard. And I'm just always wondered why you would do that, because it's probably the most important aspect of your grow. Like my nicest clone or my nicest veg plant never makes it into the flower room. When I see a plant, I take a bunch of clones, or however you're going to do it. When I see one that's really special and outgrowing, or the profile's nice and everything else, like that becomes my next mom. You know, build off of strength. And you know, I can go on forever on all of these sort of topics that we touched on. They're all like integrated, and here we go, integrated pest management. So it's very important to not just do one, it's to do it all, and understand your room, understand your weaknesses, and reach out if you don't know. I mean, I've failed my way to success, I guess is the best way to put it, you know. And the thing is, what we're seeing with the black market into the legal mainframe is, in the black market they have all these tool sets to use. You know, if they have an issue, oh, spray this or do that or whatever. It is of the utmost importance to understand your system, your diseases, your pet, be ahead of the game, because you really don't have much for tool sets right now. And you know, plant health, and of course the health of the environment, you know, that it's growing in is key. And that's what we have to focus on all day long, every single day. You know, someone always needs to be looking at that.
I think you're right on that, Andrew, because you're bang on with we have very limited tools, and to really elevate cannabis into a high quality product, it's not going to be following a recipe. It's going to really be understanding from the moment that seed cracks or the second that clone has been taken, what's actually going on with the environment and how we can all tie that in. Av, just to bring it back to you for a moment, I find your approach really interesting. What do you see for going forward as far as integrated crop management or integrated pest management? What would be your ask or something you'd like to see come up in the very near future for cannabis?
Probably, you know, going back to Laura's comment where she'd like, you know, perhaps envision a cannabis sector that's a little bit closer to the vegetable sector. I kind of hope the vegetable sector becomes a little bit closer to the cannabis sector. I think in terms of biopesticides and limiting the amount of more harsh chemicals that can be used is a good thing, and I hope that we can look at things like proper nutrition. And to some degree, I'd love to see foliar feeding be included into the Health Canada regime. Nutrition is in large part, I think, the way of mitigating a lot of these pest and pathogen problems. So, and of course, you know, if we get more growers like Andrew into the regulated market, all the better. Living soils would be a real game changer in our sector.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's a lot of fun.
Anu, from the education perspective, do you see something that you'd like to see maybe with some of the colleges that you're working with currently or on the education side that you would like to see upcoming young growers touching subjects on in their college courses so that when they graduate, they're prepared?
So specifically for the cannabis programs that I deal with, there's a few things. Like the thing that I found is the educational piece, the information is fantastic, but one thing that the students really aren't really being told is, you know what, this is a hard job. It's not just a 9-to-5 office job. Maybe your facility needs you there at 5 o'clock in the morning because if it's a greenhouse, maybe you need to beat the heat. I mean, I've seen greenhouses at 7 o'clock in the morning and they're already hitting 44 degrees. And at that point, that's when your breaks, mandatory breaks, need to be implemented. And then at that point at 45, you can't work without medical supervision. So a lot of these up and coming eager beavers that would just love to get in this industry, they're not really being told that, look, this is really hard. And sometimes maybe you're just sweeping, maybe you're mopping, maybe you're just de-leafing over and over and over. But what they need to understand is that this is somebody's medicine. For example, me personally, I like to, anytime I train anybody, I always tell them that you might sit there as you're mopping going, what the hell am I doing this for? Well, guess what? You mopping that floor has created the clean environment that the plant growing that I need in order to use my hands is. I have severe nerve damage, and there's days where I can't even hold a pencil. And so I let people know that, you know what, by you sitting in that greenhouse, in that awful Tyvek or those unflattering scrubs, wearing all that PPE, doing a mundane job in that moment is actually so important. And the boots on the ground workers, they don't get that recognition sometimes. And that's what I try to instill in the people that want to enter the industry is that, look, this is not shiny, glamorous work. It is hard work. It needs your dedication. But if you're so passionate about this plant that is changing the world and helping get rid of opiate addictions and giving people a more holistic and natural alternative to a prescription medication, it's so worth it. It's absolutely worth it. You got into this course or this program for a reason. And maybe,
Mhm.
you know what, maybe there's I'm a stoner and I get to work with weed all day. Woo, cool, awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are a lot of people whose lives are impacted on whether it's an emotional, a physical. Do you have PTSD and you can't sleep? Are you reliving nightmares? Do you suffer from a debilitating medical condition like myself, where my life was completely on hold for quite some time, and I was being guinea pigged by specialists who actually didn't have a treatment for me, and they thought, well, hey, well, let's try this medication. And
Mhm.
I had to put a stop to that because I ended up becoming more sick. So now I can't walk, now I can't eat, now I can't use my hands. Well, great, because all I want to do is throw up all day from whatever side effect my medications are having. So for those students, it's believe in what you're doing, know it's going to be hard work, but there's somebody on the receiving end of what you're growing that you are probably saving their life. And you are, sorry, I get a little emotional talking about that, but you're saving someone's life. You're improving the quality of their life, and you're helping them actually function and enter their day being okay, and not being so limited by what they might have without a treatment or with a harsher prescription drug. So that's what I try to instill people, because I see a lot of demotivation in the facilities, and I try to just boost them back up and remind them why they're there.
It's so good that you bring that up, Anu, because at the end of the day, this is a very challenging crop, and there's a lot of challenges still have to get through. And if we keep reminding ourselves of the purpose of why we do it at the end of the day, then those hard days with cannabis aphid covering our plants become a little bit easier, hey?
Yeah, or finding them in your bra. Like that's mortifying. I can't even imagine that poor young lady. Goodness.
Just no shortcuts. I always find that whenever there's something that happens, it's because it's someone just didn't do the extra step, or missed that step, or took that extra shortcut. And I completely agree with Av. Like, it is nutrition, it is preemptive nutrition, scouting, knowing all of your parameters for growing that plant and bringing that genetic to its potential. That is our goal. And it exactly as you were saying, and it's just like understanding all of that. Don't take the shortcuts. Have a proper SOP, follow it, and add to the SOP as you learn, because we're all learning. The soil food web for me is like, no matter how good I think I am, I'm not. And I feel like I'm still in grade one. Still learning so much about how organics work, and I've been lucky. I learned a lot from my own mistakes from growing, but I have so many people in my community who've taught me so much and still do. It's being willing to accept that information and doing exactly what we're doing right here, is sharing that information, having a common think tank rather than trying to do it yourself, which is how it used to work, especially in black market. People just did their own thing, their own special sauce, whatnot. No, we need to sort of bring this together now and understand, how do we beat cannabis aphids? How do we stop botrytis and PM? How do you do it in a salt garden? How do you do it in an organic garden? It's all going to be different. And then it's all of the shared information, which is why I really value what we're doing here. Is what's super important. I'm going to learn off of all of you guys, and hopefully we all bring something to teach someone else, and that's what we need to do. And hopefully they can do some foliar nutrition, some organic foliars would be a great one day off. If we can push for that, that'd be great. But but I do believe that I think that the food industry is also very much I think we need to actually. I like the direction that Health Canada's gone in. I know we're lacking in skill sets. We have the skill sets. We're lacking a lot of potential tools. But you know what? Instead of looking at trying to access those tools of using like sprays and whatnot, getting to understand the plant and the biology and everything else that can help you. It's they've set a challenge up for us, and we need to step up to it. And we can beat all of these pathogens by understanding nature a little bit better, and how to augment your plant and its potential strength and its growth patterns. So that's really important.
Yeah,
Yes,
I agree totally.
Yeah, and never
Laura?
underestimate the power of a good genetic, because like I was saying before, like there are different plants, and there's like I said, a reason why you see the same vegetable cultivars available on the shelf all the time is because they do outperform all the time. And I mean, you know, like a good example is a tomato is a tomato is a tomato, but it's not. They are all tomatoes, but a cherry tomato will attract all the insects within the radius, whereas a grape tomato, nothing can bite its leathery leaves. So when I always tell like my kids and my family, when you have a choice, you know, between this one and that one, I always go for the grape because I'm just assuming that there are less pesticides on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Genetics in cannabis can take you along. You know, it can be a game changer to grow one that is really resistant to powdery mildew. And, you know, some aphids just explode on some strains, on some cultivars, and some don't on the one next to it. Like ANOO was saying with there was no barrier between the two, and you can see a difference. Like, don't let the genetics go unnoticed, because I feel like that is where it's going to head in the future is, you know, more resistant genetics to botrytis and powdery mildew and cannabis aphid and genetics.
I guess the other
Don't
big thing
grow
too
the one that doesn't want to be grown.
Yeah. And of course, this also helps people through the one topic we haven't talked about is misinformation. And there's a lot of that. And so this process here will help demystify a lot of the issues out there. And you know, the amount of times I've listened to bad information and tried it out, you know, I can't even count. And so again, it's just like, these are people that are experts, that are passionate about it. You guys are all super passionate. We're trying to provide information that we know it's tested, it's true, we've done it. And in a system where we don't have those tool sets that are provided for the illicit market or for the food market for that matter, it's important to know what is good value information and what is like just someone just, it worked for me, but it could have been something completely different, untested, you know? But yeah.
I agree. I think there's a lot of science on the cannabis side that just needs to get studied, researched, and published so that we can actually start going forward. And until then, we will continue to have webinars like this and share our experiences, because that grower to grower information is probably some of the best we have available right now. We are pretty well at time now, guys. I really appreciate you guys joining for the panel today. Everyone here is so passionate and knowledgeable about their particular subjects. Please, whoever in the audience today watching, reach out to these people. They've got a lot of knowledge to share and just really passionate about the plant. We will be moving into a Q&A side shortly after this wraps up, and we'll all be available for some questions and answers from the audience. So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for all the attendees here, and this was really fun. I wish we had 5 more hours though.
So do I.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
everyone. Thanks,
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.